For our audience who might not be familiar with Dr. Okun and Dr. Dorsey, they have written a brand new book called The Parkinson's Plan. And I think as a community, we are really lucky because you are really making a difference and really hitting the headlines. And I know that you were on NPR, you've been on various news programs, podcasts, and then you're just written up in the New York Times opinion section and are on the New York Times bestseller list. And that is really remarkable. So
thank you. I will correct you, though. It's not a book, it's a movement, folks. And that's why we're so happy to be here with Power for Parkinson, because this is a movement.
Yes, okay. Well, that's great. And I think it's great. We're all going to learn about the movement in just a very brief nutshell, and you're going to hear so much more about it. But in 2020, I believe, your first book came out for Ending Parkinson's, and you were really sounding the alarm about Parkinson's as a fast-growing pandemic that is largely preventable. And now you're back with your latest book, The Parkinson's Plan, and within the book, there is a list of 25 actions, habits, and considerations that people can use to lower the risks of Parkinson's. So I thought maybe we could just start at the beginning, and let's just start with the concept of the Parkinson's pandemic. And I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but Michael, I thought you might have coined that concept of a Parkinson's
pandemic. Yeah, I actually got in a lot of trouble for that, as it turns out, Nina. Not that there's any trouble in Austin, Texas ever, but you know, so back in 2012, 2013, I wrote my first book that was aimed toward persons with disease, and I actually learned a lot. The first thing I learned was that, you know, you write, you know, like hundreds and hundreds of research papers and nobody reads them.
Yeah.
You know, this thing. And then you write a book called 10 Secrets to the Happier Life, and everybody wants to read it. So it becomes a best, and it was just about like 10 things that you need to know, right, to live a better life. And so it seemed simple, but was really an important message. And it taught me a lesson of how important it is for us to get out on the grassroots and to help people living with Parkinson's. In the prologue of that book, I used 2 words, the Parkinson pandemic. And it haunted me for a few years, as many of my colleagues were quite let's say, not nice, you know, about the idea of that. Yeah. And however, I was bolstered by my friend Ray Dorsey, who's really good at math and statistics and all of the things that I'm not as good at. And Ray worked for McKinsey, and when he crunched the numbers there's a very important data set called the Global Burden of Disease Study, and when he crunched the numbers in 2020, it turned out that when we wrote Ending Parkinson's Disease, it was going to be 12 million people by 2035. Is that right? So 12 million people with Parkinson by 2035. And people went, oh my, like we have a problem. This is growing faster than Alzheimer's, right? Shocker, right? But that was only one cut of data. Then we write this book, okay? Then another cut of data comes out, and guess where we are today in 2025? 11.8 million, okay? So we are growing, you know, exponentially, and so we need to ask the question, why? And that's a lot of what the book is about why is it, you know, whether, you know, why are we growing? Yeah. And by the way, the word pandemic, it is sort of a Greek-Latin derivation, modern term. Pan means all, demos means people. So I know we apply it to infectious diseases, but it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, infectious, but it's growing very fast.
Yeah, yeah. And so in your book, you talk about the role of the environment. And I thought maybe for those of you who haven't quite had a chance to read the book yet, Ray, maybe you could start, either one of you could start by just saying, what are these environmental toxins that we're worried about, or you're worried about, and what is that role in the causation of Parkinson's?
So, first of all, speaking of impressive, Nina, how impressive is all of this?
Yeah, awesome.
I know.
So, kudos to Power for Parkinson's. Kudos for all of you for showing up, for giving evidence to the pandemic. and for being part of the voices that will change the course of this disease. You know, the evidence of the pandemic is in this room, right? If we were here 20 years ago, you know, we would have had maybe a dozen people in the room. We would not be standing room only in Austin, Texas, in a strip mall doing exercises to make people better. And we could, if we address these chemicals, if we say that Parkinson's is largely man-made, if we say Parkinson's is preventable, we wouldn't have to be here.
Right.
We're here, Michael and I are here because we don't want to be here a generation from now. We want all your children and your grandchildren to be free of this disease. We want to say your spouses, your brothers, your sisters, your nieces, your nephews need not live in a world that's plagued by Parkinson's disease. For the vast majority of human history, we've been around for 200,000 years. For 199,800 years, we have not had Parkinson's disease. We have not had Parkinson's disease. Dr. Parkinson didn't describe the condition until 1817. He said, I'm describing a disease that's not in the medical literature. Diseases come and go. We didn't always have influenza. We don't have smallpox. We don't have polio largely. HIV is disappearing. We didn't have obesity. We didn't have autism, the numbers that we have now. We've created some of the diseases that plague us. And if we make our voices heard, if we continue to do exercise, if we continue to gather and communicate, we're going to get rid of this disease. And that's why we're here. That's why we're in Austin, Texas. That's why Michael came from Gainesville, Florida. That's why I came from New York City, because we don't want to be here 25 years from now. And the reason I say this with increasing confidence is because there's evidence that chemicals in our food, water, and air are fueling the rise of disease. So some of you think about the genetics. How many of you carry genetic mutation for Parkinson's disease in this room? So just look around.
Look at those hands. There's not a lot of them there, right?
So there was a study done by the Parkinson's Foundation. Michael's worked for them for 10, 15 years. And
Like
they
20.
they looked at 8,000 individuals from the United States and around the world. They offered free genetic counseling and free genetic testing. And of that 8,000 individuals, only 12.5% carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor for the disease. So another way, 87% of Americans have no known genetic cause or genetic risk factor for disease. The vast majority of Americans with Parkinson's have no known genetic cause or risk factor disease. The principal reason that we have Parkinson's lies not within us, but outside of us in our environment. And so what are the environmental chemicals that are fueling the rise? So I was just speaking to this gentleman here in the front row, and who talked, can I share your story? Sure. And so I asked him, as I often do, how did you get Parkinson's? And no one knows for certain, but you know, as a young child, he's riding on the back of his grandfather's tractor as he's spraying cotton fields in Tennessee. And it turns out one of the pesticides most strongly linked to Parkinson's is a pesticide or weed killer called paraquat. Farmers exposed to that chemical have 150% increased risk of developing disease. 150% increased risk. If you simply live or work near where paraquat is sprayed, your risk of getting Parkinson's is doubled. You don't have to be a farmer. You just live or work near where paraquat is sprayed, your risk is doubled. And then our colleagues have demonstrated in the laboratory that when you expose mice to paraquat, they develop Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's is not a natural consequence of aging. So let's say that together. Parkinson's is not a natural consequence of aging. If you put a mouse in the lab, it will not, and you let it age, it does not spontaneously develop Parkinson's disease. The only way we can get a mouse in the University of Florida to get Parkinson's is we alter its genetics or we expose it to chemicals. Left to its own devices, it doesn't get Parkinson's, and quite frankly, it doesn't even get Alzheimer's. The other chemical that's really strongly linked to them is a dry cleaning chemicals, something called trichloroethylene. How many people have heard of trichloroethylene or perchloroethylene? Oh, fantastic. So
I think they've been reading the book, right?
So these chemicals, many people know about Camp Lejeune, the Marine base in North Carolina that was contaminated with this chemical. Marines who served there had a 70% increased risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Now these Marines, by definition, are healthy, right? They're young. They were 20 years old when they were stationed at the Marine base, and they were only there for 2 years. So, you know, if you're in the military, you move from base to base. Yet 34 years later, they had a 70% higher risk of developing Parkinson's than the Marines served at a less polluted base. And the third one is air pollution, outdoor air pollution. which is increasingly linked to Parkinson's and especially to Alzheimer's. If you're not exposed to these pesticides, if you're not exposed to these dry cleaning and degreasing chemicals, if you live in a community that has healthy and clean air, you are highly, highly unlikely to ever develop Parkinson's disease. So if you don't want your kids, you don't want your grandkids, you don't want your nieces and nephews, you don't want your spouse to be affected, there are things that we give you in the book, 25 actions that we can do as individuals, actions we can take in our communities, and actions we can take together collectively as societies to prevent you from ever getting this terrible disease.
Well, that's a lot to process, I think, and but really impactful. And I think, I'd like to get to your 25, the list. But before we get to the list, I just think I have a few questions that I thought people might be interested in. But I know you say that genetics is not necessarily playing a role, but there are people that some people will get it and some people won't. So. And also, I know in the book you've also talked about the transmission, whether it's possibly through the gut or respiratory. Can you talk about some of those, the differences in the presentation of the disease, and also, what may be the difference, or what may trigger?
So in 2003, a really smart German pathologist named Heiko Brock said that when he looks under the brains of individuals with Parkinson's disease, he doesn't think Parkinson's disease, which we think of as a brain disease, does not begin the brain. Parkinson's disease, which we think of as a brain disease, does not begin the brain. And so why does he say that? He says because when I find the pathology of Parkinson's disease, a misfolded protein called alpha-synuclein, I first find it in the smell center of the brain, that's something called the olfactory bulb, or I find it in a nerve that goes to the gut called the vagus nerve. In 2019, our colleague, Dr. Per Borghammer in Denmark, said there are two forms of Parkinson's disease, two major forms of Parkinson's disease. There is a gut form, first form of the disease that begins in the gut, and it ascends up the nerve called the vagus nerve and then spreads up to the brain stem. Those individuals have early constipation because it affects the nerve that innervates the gut. They have early sleep disturbances. They act out their dreams. They have early difficulties with blood pressure. They're more prone to have more symmetric disease, more prone to having dementia. A second form of the disease, maybe perhaps for you, is people who have the disease begins in their nose. And it begins in their nose, usually on one side, so they have much more asymmetry. One side's much more affected than the other. They have maybe early loss of smell, but they do not get constipation until later in the disease. They do not get sleep disturbances until later in the disease. They do not get prominent difficulties with blood pressure later into the disease, and only much, much later do they get significant difficulties with thinking. I read all these papers. I told Michael earlier today, I printed them all out. I did my reading on Sunday, as I like to do. And I said, this all makes sense to me. And I emailed him. I said, dear Dr. Borghammer, great articles. Could this two models be consistent with chemicals that we ingest, that we swallow, that give rise to a gut or body first form of the disease? And chemicals that we inhale, like on the back of a tractor, that would lead to a nose or brain first form of the disease. He wasn't so sure. He was skeptical, like my friend Michael Okun.
I am the skeptical one, just FYI. I'm also taller and more skeptical.
And he said he came around. So we wrote a paper arguing called "The Body, the Brain, the Environment, and Parkinson's Disease," arguing that chemicals that we ingest, polluted well water, marines at Camp Lejeune drinking the chemical, dry cleaning chemical in their water, will lead to a more gut first form of the disease. And people who inhale toxins, you're living next to a golf course, you're living next to a farm, you're on the back of a tractor with your grandfather, leading to more of a nose or brain first form of the disease. So Parkinson's begins outside the brain, most individuals likely in the nose and some in the gut. And these two different ways lead to different symptoms that people develop.
Okay, so that's a lot to process, and you're kind of giving us
Well,
the,
you asked the
big,
questions,
I know,
right?
I know. But I thought it was really interesting. But I think that sort of gives the big picture of what this book is about. But I also think, obviously within the book, you're talking about some really difficult challenges to prevent Parkinson's. And you've come up with some of your recommendations, but why don't we, first of all, look, how how can people decrease their exposure to pesticides, to the weed killers, to the TCE and PCE?
Yeah.
How can
Well,
we?
I'll start a little bit, and
Yeah.
I'll just say, many of us go to the doctor when we can get parking, or they'll let us in to see them, right? Even the general doctor. And I say that halfway in jest and halfway true, right? Because we all know how it is, right? And you go and you feel lucky to get in, right? But your general doctor is getting better and better at checking your cholesterol levels, playing what we call primary prevention to decrease your risk of heart disease, of lung disease, of other things, and we call this primary prevention of disease. And this is really important. We don't talk about this at all with Parkinson, and it's a problem. Ray and I both have a problem with it. Everybody in this room should have a problem with it. It's time that we start talking about, how do we lessen this? Because we don't want to give this disease to, the next generation. We also want to take care of the people who have the disease. Now, in the book, we write about the Parkinson 25, which was an idea that Ray came up with. And these are things that you can do whether you have Parkinson or you do not have Parkinson, okay? So they could be prevention, but also after you get Parkinson too. And so it's important, and one analogy would be, like if you have lung cancer, okay, what's the first thing the doctor tells you? Stop smoking, right? Right. So if you have Parkinson's disease, you don't want to continuously expose yourself to things that might be making, stuff worse, and you want to do the things that could be making things better. And so we designed a Parkinson 25, which is something for everyone, and I think really useful to think in those terms. And I'm going to turn to Ray, and Ray, maybe you can tell them some of your favorites in the 25.
So if the chemicals in our food, water, and air are causing Parkinson's disease, which is largely a man-made disease, it stands to reason that if you want to prevent Parkinson's, you want to avoid getting exposed to these chemicals in our food, water, and air. And if you already have Parkinson's, like many in this room do, you want to stop getting exposed. So we know some individuals with Parkinson's disease have a fast rate of progression and some have a slow. One of the explanations may be that some people are still getting exposed to the chemicals, and some individuals have long since stopped. So if you have Parkinson's disease, 40% of your 60% of your neurons have died off. You want to protect the remaining 40%. So 25 recommendations. 1, wash your produce, even your organic ones. So there are residues of pesticides on 20% of conventional produce that you buy. When the federal government determines the safety of the residues of pesticides on a piece of apple or piece of fruit, they do so after they've held the apple under cold water for 15 to 20 seconds.
15 whole seconds, right? 15 seconds. That's not very long.
If they're doing it for 15 to 20 seconds, I suggest you do more. So I have a glass bowl at home. I put my apples in. I try to buy organic wherever feasible. I put them in a bowl of water. I get a little bit of pesticide wash. I get a bottle from $4 from the grocery store. It's essentially soap, just like we wash ourselves with water and soap, because oils aren't readily removed by water. So I wash all my fruits and vegetables before I eat them, and buy organic where you can. How many people get their water from a well? Does anyone get their water from a well? How many people used to get water from a well?
Okay.
And so wells tend to be in rural areas. They tend to be near farms, and you can imagine farms that would be spraying pesticides. Exactly, those pesticides wash off to get into the groundwater. If your well is shallow, you can be drinking pesticide-laden water for years as a kid, years as a child, and then decades later getting Parkinson's disease. So if you have water in your well, first thing you're going to do today, you can go home, you're going to go to the grocery store and get a simple carbon filter, like Pure and Brita. We're not endorsing any products, but Pure and Brita. Mm-hmm. Put it on your water filter. I had it on my kitchen faucet when I lived in Rochester, New York. I have a water pitcher right now that I use in New York City. And even though I have city water, I still do this. So you can do that. If you have a well, you might also think about reverse osmosis systems. They're relatively inexpensive now. You can put them underneath your kitchen sink. And if you have a
What does
water-
reverse osmosis mean?
so it
Not
takes-
that anybody here doesn't know, but just in case they
Yeah.
don't, they don't.
It takes osmosis is the flow of water from areas of high salt concentration to areas of low. Reverse osmosis takes salts or contaminants out of your water. If you have a well, test it and test it for pesticides if you live in rural areas, or industrial chemicals if you live in urban areas. But a water filter for everyone. And the last easy one is air purifier. I don't know what's the air quality in Austin? Is it good or not good? So if an air purifier, you can get air purifier. I live in New York City now. I have one in our bedroom and one in our living room to decrease the amount of exposure to the little pieces of dirt and soot, that particulate matter that you see in smog in LA. That's little pieces of dirt and soot. Some of those we cough out, sneeze out. Some are so small that they go through the nerve responsible for smell hanging up in our upper airways. And I don't want people getting exposed to those pieces of dirt and soot because sometimes they carry around toxic metals into the brain. So wash your fruits and vegetables, organic, water purifier, water filter, and an air purifier.
And I'll just add a couple of my favorites. Are practical things, and since we're at Power for Parkinson's, exercise, okay? And we know from data now, so there's a drip of data, we know that exercise is not only good for degenerative diseases like Parkinson's, but exercise is like a drug, okay? We know from, we call it Google data. What is Google data? That's when you have so much data, you don't have to hire a statistician or a mathematician like Ray to crunch it for you, okay? That's when you have so much data, it's unbelievably, compelling. So we know about 7,000 steps a day. That's like 4 20-minute walks. People live longer. Now, you may not want to live longer, but also lifespan and health span, right, are important, right? So it can help with your health span, help with your general health too, but really helps with the Parkinson. When I say steps, I also say step equivalent. Some people can't walk. Cycling is great. I love this. Cycling in a chair is great. You can even buy things that can help you to cycle, and a chair set in front. Recumbent bike is really good. And then sleep. Sleep is so underrated, okay? I've got sensors all over my body. Like, I got them everywhere, okay? I know exactly how much I sleep, how much time I'm in bed, how much time I actually sleep. And if you can get to 7 or 8 hours, or even 6 hours for some of you, sleep is fragmented in Parkinson. When you sleep, there's a system that we discovered in the brain called the glymphatics that we actually didn't know was there. It's like a newer thing. And the glymphatics take out all of these toxins and things in your brain while you're sleeping. It's a very important system. Many of the cells in your body, they have to have ways to eat themselves, okay? Called autophagy. Not that you need to know that word, okay? But in case it comes up in Trivial Pursuit or whatever you play at home, okay? But you have to be able to get rid of those toxins. So sleeping well, and the better you sleep, the longer you're going to do better that next day. You're going to have a much better next day. So focusing on those things, that's also part of the 25, some of these practical things.
That's easier said than done. The sleep.
Well, like we always say, like what are the things that you should do?
Yes.
What are the things that you will do?
Yeah.
And then you have to ask yourself the question, the best kind of exercise is the exercise you're willing to do, okay?
Yeah.
And the best kind of sleep strategy is the sleep strategy you're willing to do. But be aware, if you have a plan, and Ray and I always say, the Parkinson plan, it's a movement. It's about, does society have a plan? And do you have a plan? And what's your plan? Okay, and I tell the story, Nina, of my son who was a championship chess player. He's a senior in high school now, but when he was in 2nd and 3rd grade, they won the national championship twice. Okay, he was on a team. And when I was playing him one night, going to bed, I'm not a bad chess player, but I retired that night from chess. I don't know if I played a game after that night. He was on his way to beating me 3 times. On the 3rd time, he stopped. He's like in 2nd grade, and he said, "Dad, do you know what your problem is?" And I said, "No, Jack, what's my problem?" And he said, "Dad, you don't have a plan." 2nd grade. He sat down, he said, "You don't have a plan, okay? And if I sit down every time I have a plan and I beat you every time." So that really stuck with me. So if you don't have a plan for your Parkinson and society doesn't have a plan, that's a problem. Yeah.
Well, on that note, and since I know we are on a time, this is time sensitive, I think what's really important is that we talk about this movement that you're leading So I think, the National Plan to End Parkinson's was passed in 2023, which was fabulous. Now environmental protection, funding and research funding are being rolled back. How do you see the change happening?
Politicians.
I give it out there. I see it to my right.
Yeah, I want
All right, go ahead. So
the
politicians
answers.
react. Politicians react to the interests and voices of their constituents. They generally don't lead. Some do. They're rare. But they react. If you make your voices heard, they will change the course of the disease. If you make your voices heard, if they hear from you and they hear about paraquat, we will ban paraquat. If 1.2 million Americans right now today have Parkinson's disease, if they call their congressmen, congresswomen, senators, we will ban paraquat. So we're giving you a very tangible ask today. We want you to sign up to be part of the PD Avengers. So the PD Avengers is a global grassroots organization formed by 3 individuals with the disease, not neurologists, not scientists. One of them is actually a physician. It's called the PD
They're
Avengers.
much cooler than us, by the way. Like, we're kind of nerds. The PD Avengers are very cool.
9,000 members in over 100 countries. You can just sign the sheet back there saying you'll be a PD Avenger. It's open to people with Parkinson's disease, people without Parkinson's disease, sons, daughters, friends, family members. Michael and I have both signed up. It's free. It takes 30 seconds to do so. And if you sign up in the back, we will make sure you get enrolled to be a PD Avenger. It's free to do so. You get their newsletter. We need to have at least 10,000 members. At least 10,000 members. Michael will say we need to have
100,000.
100,000 members, and then we will make our voices heard. And some of you are young enough, or as Michael likes to say, seasoned enough, to remember the March of Dimes. So the March of Dimes began in 1938 when people mailed in dimes to President Roosevelt, who had polio.
Which is illegal, by the way. You can't mail tender to the White House anymore.
Because they shut down the
Sorry.
mailroom.
We actually tried. We tried when we wrote our last book, so that's how we know.
And they shut down the mailroom. 17 years after the March of Dimes starts, 17 years after Jonas Salks holds up the vaccine to prevent polio. 17 years. 17 years, and we create a world largely free of polio. Another example, 1980, a 13-year-old daughter of Candace Lightner is struck and killed by a drunk driver. In 1980, drinking and driving is legal in some states in the Union. 1980, drinking and driving is legal in some states in the Union. Candace Lightner, 4 days after her daughters died, nothing to be done to bring her back. 4 days after her daughters die, she starts going to the governor of California, Jerry Brown, every day for a year. Every day for a year. 8 years after her daughter has died, drinking and driving is illegal in all 50 states. Drinking age is raised in the United States from 18 to 21. Blood alcohol level is dropped to 0.08. Every year since 1988, 10,000 fewer children, 10,000 fewer families, 10,000 fewer communities are torn apart from a death of a child from a drunk driver. Some of us in this room were part of that movement, thank you. Some of us in this room are likely alive today or not disabled because of people like Candace Lightner. 1981, a new disease, rare cancer is reported in homosexual men in New York City in the New York Times. 1987, a group of activists in New York City formed an organization called ACT UP. And they said their motto was silence equals death. Silence equals death. Because for people with HIV in the early days, there was no federal response. President Reagan was slow to respond. People were blamed for their disease. So think about that. People were blamed for their disease. Do people with Parkinson's want to be blamed for their condition? No, thank you, right? This is an involuntary exposure that all of you have had. And activists, they barricaded themselves in the streets of New York. They took over the New York Stock Exchange because a pharmaceutical company had the audacity to develop an effective treatment for HIV, but to price it too high that people couldn't afford it. 8 years after they formed ACT UP, we had protease inhibitors, which have allowed people with HIV to live near normal lives. Today, HIV is preventable with a condom. The number of new people diagnosed with HIV is at its lowest level since 1990. It's possible in the lifetime of lifetime people in this room, that HIV might disappear as a major clinical entity. These are 3 different examples: polio, drinking and driving, and HIV, where we didn't cure the disease, but we found out what the root cause of the disease was. We addressed it, and we created a world where future generations were spared the indignity of this disease. That's the challenge for everyone in this room, and that's the challenge for us to follow through on, so that by 2035, I'm the one who crunches the numbers, by 2035, the rise in Parkinson's disease is 0%. The global rise in Parkinson's disease by 2035, if we take these actions, will be 0%. In the Netherlands, the incidence of Parkinson's disease has begun to decrease. In Germany, the incidence of Parkinson's disease adjusted for age has begun to decrease because they got rid of the chemicals, I think, or because they did get rid of the chemicals. I think that's why it's beginning to decrease. We can do the exact same here. So at 2035, the global rise is 0%. And by 2036, when we come back with Nina, and she invites us back, we start talking about
With
the fall.
dinner.
Oh, yeah.
We start talking about the fall of Parkinson's disease. By 2036, we start talking about the fall of Parkinson's disease, and it can begin right here in Austin, Texas.
And you know, prevention is not a pill, it's policy. Prevention is not a pill, it's policy. Your voices matter. It may seem like your voices don't matter, but your voices matter.
And if you don't make your voices heard, ask who is going to make their voices heard. Because no one cares what a neurologist, even a tall one and a short one, think. They
Thank
care
you.
about people who are most directly affected by the disease. You must make your voices heard. That we saw that with polio, we saw that with HIV, we saw that with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. When you find your voices, when you make your voices heard, when you demand that your politicians, your representatives represent you and your interests, action will follow.
In 2020, when we wrote Ending Parkinson's Disease, which sits up here, and I think a number of you, it sounds like, have passed it around, which is great. When we wrote that book, we came up with this idea, you know, of studying how diseases are turned around: polio, HIV, breast cancer. Thank you for wearing pink today, the husband and wife with Parkinson. So it turns out that when we wrote that, we came up with the idea of the PACT: prevent, advocate, care, develop new treatments, right? And a grassroots movement was born. And that's how PD Avengers was born, because they took the book and they said, we're going to do this. Let's do it, okay? And that was awesome. They're up to 8,000 members. Like I said, they need 100,000. How much?
They're 9.
9,000 now. Okay, we're making our way around the country, but we need to get like 100,000, you know, like members. Now the plan is the plan. Like Jack, my son, we need a plan, guys. Okay, so the plan is prevent. The L is learn why. The A is the amplification of voices and new care models for Parkinson. The N is the navigation of new treatments. We need a 0% rise, 0, 10, 100, 0% rise. 10 times increase in research funding, 100% access to dopamine pills, like we have 100% access to HIV pills for the world.
So I know that there are a lot of people right now in DC like talking about the Day of Action.
Wait, people in DC are talking?
Yeah,
Say it isn't
well,
so.
a lot of people. Yeah, right. But it just so happens that we are overlapping. While we have many Parkinson's advocates that are in DC right now, but by joining PD Avengers, what is everyone expected to do?
He was there yesterday.
Yeah.
So I had the good fortune to join the New Jersey delegation, which packed the room of Senator Cory Booker's conference room. It was standing room only. It was like this, but it was standing room only. Senator Cory Booker's father had and died from Parkinson's disease. He's introduced legislation repeatedly that would effectively ban paraquat. I then went from his office and joined the West Virginia delegation, whose senior senator Shelley Capito, signed up to be the lead Senate sponsor of the National Bill to End Parkinson's Act because a constituent who's actually not even from her political party asked her to do so. She signed up to be the senior sponsor, not because she had any personal affiliation with Parkinson's, not because any family member had Parkinson's. She did so because a constituent who's actually not even part of her political party asked her to do so. And she read the New York Times article about paraquat, was unfamiliar with it. She's heavily involved in environmental issues. She listened to a 10-minute discussion on it and was favorably inclined to take action. So there are two people on the completely opposite ends of this political spectrum, Senator Cory Booker on the left, Senator Capito from West Virginia on the right, both with a deep and personal interest in trying to prevent Parkinson's disease. If we make our voices heard, paraquat goes away. What would that do for the Parkinson's community? What would that signal be to the Parkinson's community if we did finally join 50 nations, including China, in banning paraquat? What would that speak to the effectiveness and the voice of this community? And then what could we do next to prevent Parkinson's disease from affecting not only ourselves, not only worsening Parkinson's for ourselves, but making sure our children and grandchildren never get this disease?
I think it'd be awesome. I don't know what these guys think. I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm thinking that'd be awesome.
Well, I was just thinking about your study when you were looking at the golf courses, and that how living near a golf course increases your risk of getting Parkinson's. And that raises like a whole other level of the population. I mean, that's who plays golf and lives near golf courses usually, and whether, like, have you heard, because of that study, like more interest in perhaps limiting the use of paraquat and pesticides?
Let me just say, because of this guy right here and Brittany Krasnowski that were part of writing that article, my inbox like just boomed. Like, I mean, you think about, you want to catch somebody's attention, tell them there's a problem with the golf course,
yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
and they're just like, oh my, unbelievable.
Yeah.
The calls, asking my wife's texting me, like, do we still have friends? Like, what's going on? And so it turns out that the challenge is bigger than just golf courses, folks. Remember that, when you spray pesticides, and chemicals and things, they get on stuff. And then they get into your water supply, right? They can cause plumes of gas that can go from the water supply up into your homes too, right? So when they were studying this, they realized people that are close to golf courses have a higher risk of getting Parkinson. And then it didn't speak to the people who are actually playing on the golf courses, right? But of course, we know people that are playing on their golf courses, some of them lick their balls, as I said on NPR, but that didn't go over so well. But it's true, right? I'm not a golfer, neither is Ray, but apparently some people lick their balls. Okay, now I'm just saying, like, and they put the tees in their mouths. Who's a golfer? Raise your hand. Okay, all right. So you put the teas in the mouths, you lick your balls, you do all these things. You smoke your cigar, right? And you put your cigar down and you hit your shot and you put the pesticide right back in your mouth, right? So if you're going to golf courses, it's your right to know when they spray. Ask them when they're spraying. Maybe you don't want to be out there on a day when they're spraying, okay, for sure. Maybe bring your own water. If you have a water filter on your water, maybe you shouldn't be drinking their water. So there are some things you can do. Certainly, not putting things in your mouth is a good idea. And Ray, what else?
So why not ask your golf course what pesticides are they using? Can they spray less? Can they use less toxic pesticides? Really, does the price of golf need to be Parkinson's disease? There are 3 studies that link green space workers, like landscapers, to higher risks of Parkinson's disease. There's one study that links green space workers to higher risks of ALS. And it's not just golf courses. I recently learned as part of reading this book that pesticides are routinely sprayed on kids' playgrounds and schools. So I said one action we can take as a community is, can we as a community work in Austin to stop spraying pesticides on kids' playgrounds and schools?
Part of the Parkinson 25. One of the 25 things we got to protect our next generation. Why are we not doing that?
And we have the audacity to ask why 1 in 31 children get autism when we spray nerve toxins on kids' schools and playgrounds. Right? This is on us, right? Our kids didn't do this. The autistic kid doesn't. Michael has a son who has autism. It's not because the child did anything. It's because we're allowing this to happen. And it's happening on our watch. And Michael and I, in the opening of the book, we said that the rise in Parkinson's disease is a reflection of a failure for us to address it. Nina introduced us as, nice, well-educated, esteemed Parkinson's specialist, but we have failed to address the Parkinson pandemic, evidence of which is in this room. Michael and I, as you probably gather, don't like to fail, and that's why we're here, because we want to change the course, not just of Parkinson's disease, but of all brain diseases. That chemicals in our food water are fueling the rise of brain diseases from autism to Alzheimer's disease, If we change the course of that, we do it not just for Parkinson's, we do it for ALS, we do it for autism, we do it for brain cancer, we do it for Alzheimer's disease. We create a world where brain diseases are no longer the world's leading source of disability. We all live longer, healthier, and happier lives.
Well, I think, the fact that you've put this in a book, I think is so critical for everybody, and just, I on behalf of like the whole Parkinson's community, I mean, what it's done and the way you've raised awareness throughout, all over is tremendous. I mean, we need that, right? I mean, that's so fortunate. So I think, I know that we're tight on time. I'm sure people have questions. I just want to really encourage everyone to try to get a copy of this book, and just not only you read it, but share with your family and your friends, because everybody really needs to know what is going on out there. It's not just, and we always say Parkinson's is a disease of the family, everyone is involved, but the more people that are aware what Parkinson's is, what the causes are, I think is critical to making change.
And talk to each other, don't talk at each other, talk to each other. So important.
And with each other, and we wrote this book not only for the 1.2 million Americans with the disease, but for the 330 million Americans who don't want to get the disease. And so we make it in very accessible language. Michael and I don't let either one of us get away with any words that have more than 5 syllables. If there's any technical words, we create a glossary. There is not a lot of abbreviations. There's not a lot of jargon. There's a glossary. If you don't know what a gene is, we tell you what a gene is. We made it very accessible. We made it for all of you and for the 330 million Americans who don't.
Biggest word we used in that was agnotology. Tell them what that is, what that word means. We had to give that word.
That last one, then maybe we get some questions. So science.
Agnotology.
Science is the production of knowledge, ideally for the public's good. When I told one of my friends about paraquat and the manufacturer hiding its risk, just like the tobacco companies hid the risk of smoking, turns out that chemical companies have appeared to hide the risk of pesticides from the public. He said, Ray, this is agnotology. And like you and like Michael, I was like, what is agnotology? And he goes, Ray, agnotology is the deliberate production of ignorance, often for commercial gain. So Michael and I are in the business of science and advancing knowledge, ideally for the public's health. Some individuals, some organizations might be engaged in
So
the
we thought it
opposite.
might be one multisyllabic word that we would allow into the book, okay? Maybe we can take some questions, yeah?
Yeah, so do we have any questions?
Yeah, got one right there.
Anyone right
We'll
there?
repeat your question too, just
Yeah.
on the microphone, just to make sure everybody can hear it, but go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I'll project loud.
Wow.
Use your power for Parkinson's voice.
Yeah.
And go like this if you need to, okay? Because you're from Texas.
So I'm trying to grasp what is the cause of Parkinson's. And my thought is that Parkinson's is caused by toxicity, but a lot of different diseases are caused by toxicity. Where do you make the distinction between what causes Parkinson's disease and what doesn't?
So all the chemicals that we talk about that are linked to Parkinson's, all of them have a common feature, and that they all damage the energy-producing parts of cells called the mitochondria. So your brain's only 2% of your body weight, but 30% of your energy consumption. It is consuming energy and glucose all the time. And most of that's from nerve cells. And nerve cells are chock full of mitochondria. And the nerve cells in the substantia nigra, the part of the brain that's most affected with Parkinson's, they're really, really big. They're bigger than Michael, they're bigger than me, they're actually bigger than Michael and I together. They're
And I'm really tall too, by the way.
and they're 4 meters in length, and they have 1 million different connections, and they're not insulated. So they have enormous energy demands. So they have this selective vulnerability to chemicals that damage the mitochondria. One of my colleagues who's a pathologist says, Ray, think of them as a garbage bag, and that's the nerve cell, and the nerve cell is filled with jelly beans. And those jelly beans are mitochondria. So if you give someone a chemical that damages the mitochondria, that's either inhaled or ingested and dissolves in fat, you have a recipe for a chemical that could be contributing to Parkinson's disease.
And then also just to add just a little extra to that, dog pile on that, when we say Parkinson's disease, we should properly say Parkinson's disease is, plural, okay? So there's more than one cause, so there's more than one chemical, there's more than one gene, there's more than one, so there's a number of different causes for Parkinson's disease, although you might be able to categorize them and clump them into one.
Is there an
Charles?
online site where we can sign up this petition where you need 10,000 signatures?
So you just go to pdavengers.com, and you can sign up. You can actually, we made it really easy on the sign up sheet right there. If you just check your name and write your name and email address, we'll sign you up for you. So just put your name and email address on the sheet when you walk out. We'll sign you up. It's free to do. You can stop at any time. It's no obligation.
I want to get my friends to sign up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll put it on our web, it should be on our website.
So just think kind of like you're the heroes, right?
our
The
email.
Avengers, right? You're gonna avenge this, right, with your cape. So pdavengers.com.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Will your book be available in the immediate future as an ebook?
It's already available as an ebook. Sarah Brewer is a great voice. It's really a great story, and that so I've written a number of books over the years, 14 or 15 books, and so I've had a number of different voices. And when I brought home the voices from the publisher, Ray and I were looking at them. I brought them to my wife Leslie, and I said, "You choose the voice so that Ray and I won't get blamed for choosing the wrong voice." And she listened to all of the voices, and she rejected all 10. And I said, "Well, what's wrong with these 10?" She says, "There are no women on this list." And so we sent it back to the publisher. And so we have a great, voice. She's also done thriller novels too, so it should be a thrilling, listen. But Brewer is the name of the voice. But it's an audio book. You can get it on Amazon as well if you want to listen to
It's
it.
on
And then
Kindle and
Yeah.
Electro and
Yeah.
Kindle.
Yeah.
And right now it's sold out, which is a nice sign.
but you can get it on Kindle.
Yeah, you Kindle
and
and
on Audible.
ebook and
Yeah.
audiobook are available
And
right now.
Ray and I have always distributed the benefits to multiple charities and things. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you account for people that an entire family, being the youngest of 5 and the youngest of 14 cousins, all within 30 miles of each other, roughly, on Long Island, New York? How do you account for I'm the only one that has Parkinson's?
This is a great question, Ray. Why don't you start on this one? I love this question.
So only a minority of people exposed to any chemical develop a disease. So only 10 to 20% of smokers get lung cancer. Not everyone exposed to asbestos gets mesothelioma. So why would one particular individual get the disease and why is the other not? Short answer is not sure, but I'll give you 3 possible explanations. One is exposure. What was the dose that the individual was exposed to? What was the duration they were exposed to? What was the route? Did they ingest it or inhale it? And what was the timing? I think the seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. The seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. The same amount of a chemical exposure to a 2-year-old child is much different than to a 20-year-old man or a 40-year-old man. So exposure, dose, duration, route, and timing. Then interactions. So some of those genetic causes, those 12.5% of Americans who carry a genetic risk factor, the most common genetic risk factor is a mutation in a gene called GBA. Probably someone in this room carries a GBA mutation. Research done by our colleague Dr. Caroline Tanner and Ethan Brown showed that those individuals appear to be especially susceptible to the effects of pesticides. So if you carry a genetic mutation that puts you at higher risk, that could be, or less studied are genetic differences in how we metabolize chemicals. So just like, I think everyone in this room knows that some people metabolize drugs faster and some metabolize drugs slower. It could be the same thing, and likely is the same thing for chemicals. And then the third interaction, I think chance. I think there's just sometimes people are getting exposed. We're misfilling this protein, sometimes get out of control, and sometimes we clear it. And I think there are modifiers, age being probably the most important, but other comorbidities like diabetes are important. Sex could be a factor, and many stress, and many others. Lack of exercise, diet.
I'm going to blow your mind by giving you an extra little fact. So when Gregor Mendel, who was a monk, was crossing, like plants together and developing the field of genetics, everything was perfect. This number come out, this number are purple flowers, and, et cetera, right? in the real world, that's not how it works, okay? If Gregor Mendel was alive, or maybe he's turning in his grave now, it turns out that we have something called incomplete penetrance. That means you can have a gene but never have a disease. That's why genetic counselors are so important. In GBA1, the most common genetic risk factor for Parkinson, it's only 10% penetrant. That means you can carry it 90% of the time, you may not get Parkinson. In LRRK2, the second most common, okay? 30% penetrant, right? So even having the gene, a lot of people after they get genetics counseling don't want to have it. There was a recent Israeli study. Israel has a lot of Berber Arabs and a lot of Jews. They fight because they're brothers and sisters, right, genetically, just parenthetically, in case you're wondering. And it turns out that even if you have a family history, that 13% number only goes to like 19%, even with a family history. So it's not as much as you think. And when Carly Tanner looked at it too, even identical twins, identical twins don't have a higher rate than fraternal twins, right, across. So there's something else going on here, and it's very interesting. Did that blow your mind? All right, good. Thank you for saying that, even if it didn't.
Okay, maybe just one more
One more
question.
question, yeah.
One more question, Amparo.
Tell us your name and what it means, because I thought that was great when you introduced yourself earlier.
Oh, thank you. Amparo, it means protection or shelter.
Okay, so all of you that need support, this
Yes.
is your person right here. in the front row. Okay.
Yes.
In the Parkinson's plan, because I've had 3 head injuries that may have, it seems, timing-wise, contributed to my Parkinson's diagnosis. In your book, how do you deal with that possibility?
You got it.
Yeah, so it turns out that head trauma, particularly with concussions and multiple concussions, risk factor for all degenerative diseases, including Parkinson's. Okay, and it turns out that you can get types of head trauma that cause diseases that look like Parkinson's, and you can actually get Parkinson's. So we know that these are related with an increased association. We're really concerned, in addition to that, for our children and our athletes and our people on playing fields who get concussions and are also getting the pesticide exposure on top. So when you put two things together, it gets even worse. So what you are sharing with the group is what are called risk factors, okay? And it turns out that the risk factor of head injury may be a 2 times risk factor. And the risk factor of TCE might be 5 times, a lot more, right? Of that, chemical, what's paraquat, would you say?
What, 2.5?
2.5, right? So then you start putting those together, you get a mathematician like Ray, it's not good. Like when you put those things, you put all those things together. Now, interestingly, Muhammad Ali had a lot of head trauma, okay, as well. But it turns out that Muhammad Ali had regular dopamine responsive Parkinson, like the people in this room that have dopamine responsive Parkinson, but he did have a risk factor, and that was being hit in the head as well. So that increased his risks of converting. But he had young onset Parkinson, for those of you that have young onset Parkinson. People think it's just because he got hit in the head, but there are multiple interactions.
Okay.
You want to squeeze one more in? Let's squeeze
You're
one more
doing
in.
okay with
Let's
that?
squeeze
Okay.
one more in.
Question.
If I miss my plane, I miss my plane. Who cares?
Oh, no.
And the dog's up too, so.
Talking about, trying to prevent this going forward, isn't the exposure in the military a big part of where the next generation could be getting these chemicals?
Yeah.
So the
Great
book
question.
opens with the stories of Dr. Sarah Winningham and Jana Reed, 2 women, both served, both went to the U.S. Air Force Academy, both ran track, both became physicians, both served around the country, including in Afghanistan. Both are mothers. Both were diagnosed with Parkinson's in their 40s within 1 month of each other. And
Those aren't the only stories. That's the story of the lead in the book.
And we tell you, I won't give everything away, but we tell you why they might have developed Parkinson's disease. And it turns out the military members, they're disproportionately represented among people with Parkinson's. 10% of people with Parkinson's in the United States are veterans, and they're being exposed to chemicals, whether it's Agent Orange, trichloroethylene, or others. And it's so much that Dr. Whittingham says, her daughter now was interested in the military, and she's concerned. She encouraged this early on, but now she reflects back and is not encouraging her, not because of the danger of coming in harm's way, but the danger of being exposed to chemicals as the price of service. I think we should
Part
think
of the
about what
Parkinson
that means.
25 is we need to support our veterans communities more aggressively. So thank you for the question.
Okay. Well, I mean, this has been really fascinating, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the couch. That was great.
Oh,
wasn't it
yeah.
great? Y'all had to sit on seats. We got to sit on a couch.
Congratulations on the success of your book, and we really appreciate you coming to Austin.
Yeah,
Thank
and the
you.
success of the book will be when we come back 10 years from now and the rise of Parkinson's is
Exactly.
0%, and we start talking about the fall and that your children and grandchildren are spared this terrible disease.
But
It's
you're
a
getting the
movement.
word out, so
Spread
that's
the word.
That's
It's a
great.
movement, guys.
Join
Yes.
We need the
Yeah.
movement. Join the
Yep.
movement. Read the book. Yeah.
All right.